In the history of warfare, courage is often measured by medals and sacrifice by casualty lists. By these metrics, one American infantry regiment stands in a league of its own. In less than 2 years of combat, this single unit would earn more decorations for bravery than any other of its size in American history. They would receive 21 Medals of Honor, over 9,000 Purple Hearts, and 7 Presidential Unit Citations. Their motto was simple and resolute: go for broke. But the story of this unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, isn't just a story of battlefield valor. It's a story of profound and painful irony. Because as these young men fought for America's freedom in Europe, their own parents, brothers, and sisters were prisoners of the American government, locked away behind the barbed wire of internment camps. This is the story of the Nisei warriors, the sons of Japanese immigrants who, in a stunning act of patriotism, fought to prove their loyalty to a nation that had branded them as the enemy. The story of the 442nd begins in the ashes of Pearl Harbor. The attack on December 7, 1941, plunged the U.S. into war and unleashed a wave of anti-Japanese hysteria. Decades of simmering racial prejudice, fueled by fear and propaganda, exploded into the open. Suddenly, every person of Japanese ancestry was seen as a potential spy. In one of the most shameful chapters of American history, this fear became law. In February 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. This authorized the forced removal of all Japanese Americans from the West Coast. Over 120,000 people, 2/3 of them American-born citizens, were rounded up. They were given days to abandon their homes, their businesses, and their entire lives. They were herded onto trains and shipped to 10 desolate relocation centers in the barren interior of the country. These were concentration camps in all but name. Bleak settlements of tar paper barracks surrounded by guard towers and barbed wire. For the young Nisei men, this was a profound crisis. They were Americans. They grew up speaking English, playing American sports, and pledging allegiance to the American flag. Now, their own country was treating them and their families as the enemy. Initially, they were classified as enemy aliens and barred from military service. It was the ultimate insult. They were told they weren't worthy to fight for the only country they had ever known. But many of these young men felt a burning need to prove their loyalty. They petitioned the government, demanding the right to serve. By 1943, as the war dragged on, the government relented. It authorized the formation of a segregated combat unit composed entirely of Nisei volunteers. The response was overwhelming. In Hawaii, where mass internment hadn't happened, more than 10,000 men volunteered for just 1,500 spots. On the mainland, the decision was agonizing. Young men in the camps had to weigh their patriotism against the bitter reality of their family's imprisonment. Yet even there, thousands chose to serve. From this pool of determined volunteers, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team was born. They were sent for training to Camp Shelby, Mississippi. The cultural clash was immediate. These were young men of Japanese descent, many from urban California or Hawaii, suddenly dropped into the segregated Deep South. They faced suspicion and racism, but they knew the world was watching. They knew they had to be better, faster, and tougher than every other unit. It was here they adopted their famous motto, a piece of Hawaiian gambling slang: go for broke. It meant risking everything on a single effort. It would become their defining creed. In May of 1944, the 442nd was deployed to Europe to fight the German army. The strategic irony was not lost on them. They were being sent to fight one racist regime in Europe, while their own families suffered under a system of racial segregation. Back home, they arrived in Italy and were thrown into the brutal fight up the mountainous peninsula. From their very first engagement, the men of the 442nd fought with a terrifying, almost reckless ferocity. They attacked heavily fortified German positions with a relentless determination that astounded their allies. The Germans they faced were elite troops, yet the Nisei soldiers consistently outfought them. Their casualty rates were horrific, but their success was undeniable. They weren't just good soldiers, they were extraordinary. After the brutal Italian campaign, the 442nd was transferred to eastern France. It was here, in the dark, cold forests of the Vosges Mountains, that the 442nd would face its crucible and cement its legend. In late October 1944, a battalion from the 36th Texas Division advanced too far, too fast. They were cut off and completely surrounded by a superior German force. They became known as the Lost Battalion. For 2 days, other units tried to break through and rescue them, but each attempt was thrown back with heavy losses. The situation was desperate. The 275 men of the Lost Battalion were facing annihilation. The High Command, in desperation, turned to the 442nd. They were pulled from a well-deserved rest and ordered to do what no one else could: break the siege and rescue the Texans. For the Nisei soldiers, the order was simple. They were Americans. Other Americans were in trouble. They would go get them. What followed was one of the most brutal small unit actions of the entire war. The 442nd launched a direct frontal assault on the entrenched German forces. The terrain was an attacker's nightmare, a dense forest of tangled trees and steep, muddy slopes. The battle devolved into a primitive, close-quarters struggle for every foot of ground. The 442nd attacked with almost suicidal courage. They were thrown back, they regrouped, and they attacked again. One particularly steep slope became known as Suicide Hill. The Nisei soldiers charged up this hill directly into withering German machine gun fire. Men fell, but others stepped over them and kept moving forward. The fighting was relentless for 5 straight days. Finally, on the afternoon of October 30th, after a final, desperate charge, the 442nd broke through the last German line. They had reached the Lost Battalion. Only 211 of the original 275 men were still able to walk. The Texans were ecstatic, but the cost of their rescue was almost incomprehensible. To save those 211 men, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team had suffered more than 800 casualties. Their own ranks had been gutted. This single battle defined the character of the 442nd. They had been asked to do the impossible, and they had done it. They had truly gone for broke. The war didn't end there. They were sent back into the line, fighting their way into Germany and then back to Italy to break the formidable German Gothic line. It was here that Private First Class Sadao Munamori earned a Medal of Honor. During a fierce assault, his platoon was pinned down. Munamori single-handedly took out 2 enemy machine guns. As he crawled back, a German grenade landed in a shell hole with 2 of his comrades. Without hesitation, he dove onto the grenade, smothering the blast with his own body and saving their lives at the cost of his own. When the war finally ended, the men of the 442nd returned to the United States. President Harry S. Truman welcomed them home on the White House lawn. Looking at the battle-worn soldiers, he told them, "You fought not only the enemy, but you fought prejudice, and you have won." The unit, which totaled about 14,000 men throughout its service, had earned over 18,000 individual awards for bravery. But their return home was bittersweet. They were heroes in uniform, but some still faced "No Japs Allowed" signs in their own hometowns. Many returned directly to the internment camps to retrieve their families, who were only then being released. They had fought for America's freedom, and now they had to help their parents rebuild their lives from nothing. The story of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team is a powerful, complex, and quintessentially American ember. It's the story of how a group of young men, wronged by their own country, chose not bitterness, but a fierce and violent patriotism as their response. They fought to prove they were Americans, and in doing so, they set a standard for courage and sacrifice that may never be equaled. Their legacy is a potent reminder that the strength of a nation is not defined by the uniformity of its people, but by the ideals they are willing to fight and die for, even when their own nation falls short of those ideals itself. Thanks for watching.